Let me welcome the CEO of Disclosure today. He is Mr. Rishi Maharaj. Always good to see you, my brother. Thank you and good morning to you.
Good morning to you and good morning to all your listeners this morning.
It is good to have you on a Sunday morning. Nation's waking up. We are looking at campaign finance reform because, as I said before, it is convenient to talk about it. It is great lip service, but doing something about it is another question. The issue of campaign reform. Let's talk about it. You really believe that the parties involved in Trinidad and Tobago, all parties, the two primary anyway, do you think there is really a commitment to see campaign reform? One, and if you think there is, what is the obstacle? What is the major problem to getting real conversation going on this, not just lip service?
Well, if you look at when we study public policy and stuff like that, it normally tells you policy is not what you say, it's what you do. I mean, all the political parties, when they were in government, will say, we've done X, Y, and Z, we've had consultation, we've had sessions in Parliament, dealing with campaign finance reform. That's good. Good talk. But what have you actually done? Mm-hmm. And nothing has been done. So more or less, I think there's a lack of commitment by the political parties to be able to treat with campaign finance reform. Why? Well, are there latent things behind the scenes that are stopping this thing from moving forward? Are the campaign financiers themselves putting pressure or, as they call them in the States, lobbyists, lobbying for not having serious energy behind this whole idea of campaign finance reform? I mean, unless we see anything else coming out, that seems to be the picture that we're painting, that there's some force behind the scene that doesn't want this to come about.
A select few will be very on corral with what we are talking about. Another group of people will go like, campaign reform. Okay, I heard it somewhere, but exactly what does it mean? Break that down, please.
Right, well, I think campaign finance reform is a subset of a larger picture of electoral reform in terms of the way, because what happens with campaign financing is that it comes out during an election period. So for me, it's a subset of electoral reform, and it deals with the fact that during an election, obviously, political parties have to spend money. The majority of the monies that political parties spend during any campaign period are the media ads, the flyers, and all those things. The paraphernalia goes out in terms of trying to get people to get your message across to people, one, get people to understand exactly what you're saying, and then to be able to now mobilize yourself to be able to fight an election. So all the monies that are involved in that aspect of it deals with the whole idea of campaign finances. Now, you have to remember, in Trinidad and Tobago, political parties are private entities, so they're not regulated by any laws or anything like that. The only thing EBC regulates are your symbols that you have to register, and that's the symbol you see on the ballot when you go to vote every 5 years or every 3 years and stuff like that.
Now, let me see if I follow this carefully. The Election Boundaries Commission, and the only thing they regulate your symbols.
Yeah, you have to register your symbols.
So it should be the political party symbol, the directorate.
Yeah.
I mean, it may well be
they manage the electoral process on the whole and stuff like that. And it is a very stringent process. And if you've ever worked an election, but I've actually had the privilege of working a couple of elections already. I mean, in terms of you have to be there from like 5 o'clock in the morning, doing checks and stuff like that. Presiding officer, deputy presiding officer, the amount of forms. So it's a very technical
I was not
area.
minimizing. I was merely saying that there are some areas I would expect more than just
But coming back to political parties, I mean, because they are not regulated by any laws, when it comes to election, they have to find ways of getting monies. Now, obviously, membership monies alone isn't going to cut it to run election campaign in this day and age. It may talk millions and millions. I mean, one estimate had the last election at least close to about $50 or $60 million being spent, on electronic advertising, on the internet, social media, the normal advertising on the airwaves, on the television stations, on the radio stations, printing of all those T-shirts and stuff like that, all the banners that you have, the bringing down of artists to perform at your big event leading up to the day before the election. All these things cost money. Where do political parties get money? They're not a money-generating entities. Obviously, they're going to get money from donations, from loans. Some political parties in some countries have businesses that they use to generate money, or you're going to get money from people who are going to support you in terms of businesses pumping money to political parties as what we call an investment.
You just ran into the elephant.
Yeah.
And that is precisely one of the major areas. The whole question, first of all, in mentioning the amount of money it takes to be in an election, it's almost like having a filter. So you are eliminating rather a number of people with ideas from getting involved in the play. That's why you end up with 2 or 3 parties prominently featured all the time.
Exactly.
All right. So one, it is a filter that keeps away speech and and an attempt to serve from many so-called smaller parties. But the elephant you ran up against is the one called quid pro quo and or pay to play. The pay to play is why the whole question of campaign finance reform is such a major area, because if on the one hand you hear there is a percentage of the population that is in charge of getting their way, or if on the other side you hear there is an ethnicity, if it, for whatever reason you hear any group that's getting more than what is deemed their fair share, you have to look into, okay, how do they have access? So a lot of campaign reform really is paying for access. And you pay for access, and then you pay for all the legislations that is made.
Well, yeah, I mean, how it's like I say, it's part of your investment strategy in that you invest certain amount of monies in a particular party or in a horse in the race. So some people, they're smart, they split it both ways.
Oh, well, you just told me I should not say pay to play. I should say pay to play and get payback.
Well, yeah, because I mean, they split it both ways. They may support different parties, and both major parties, have their monies in. At the end of the day, once those parties ascend the throne of political power in the country, talking about a country that generates an annual income of $40 to $45 billion a year, and the majority of the money government spends is in procurement. So you see now you're touching on campaign finance and dealing with procurement, how that comes into play. It's all interconnected. They will now seek favoritism in the awarding of contracts, lucrative contracts, either through the state or through its agencies, state enterprises, state enterprises and stuff like that, ministries, departments, to be able now to recap the money that they would have invested in you, and then to make money, extra money on the side, their profit. So it's all about investment and playing the game and dealing with how you get that money. And the problem we have is that then alienates the need for the normal citizens in the country. Are you really addressing the problems, or are you just now paying service to those who put you into power and stuff like that? Where is the money going? Is the money being shared accurately? Is money being shared equitably? Are we having value for money in terms of the services that are being rendered? Are you now going to tap the people who put you in power and say, well, listen, you're doing a bad work there and stuff like that, we need something else? And I say, well, I put you in power, so what are you harassing me for now? So all these different things are small clogs, but they all point to a bigger picture.
And the bigger picture is undermining democracy itself and all the citizenry confidence in the process. Because when folks talk about equal enforcement of the law, looking after white-collar criminals, looking after access and loopholes, looking after tax collection, looking after legislation that favor a group of people who keep getting richer, I mean, all of this is what we're talking about.
It is. I mean, just in the newspaper, I think this week I read the story with the Piaco probe, where 12 years on, it's still at the preliminary inquiry stage.
Yes.
Dealing with quote-unquote financiers of a particular party when they were in power at that time. And the whole idea, what went on with the Piaco. And it's still in the preliminary inquiry stage. And the magistrate, what I found interesting is the magistrate is trying to wrap this up at the preliminary stage.
She said enough,
before she retires in May next year. So it's been going on before her now for 12 years. I think the people who are accused are now going to be presenting their evidence and their witnesses or whatever before we decide, okay, is there a prima facie case enough to be able to go forward now? Not guilty, innocent, but just to see if we have a case to go now to the High Court, which is going to take another 5-10 years and stuff like that to deal with this whole issue.
And here's the reason,
whole question of equitably.
We have said repeatedly, and I've had you here and a couple of salient guests like yourself to keep emphasizing and reiterating the point. We have to keep hammering that we may want justice, but we must make sure we have the mechanism in place. That when we seek to get justice, you can in fact extract something that is a deterrent.
Exactly.
Because the laws as they are right now, a lot of folks get away with a lot of things.
Yeah, and people say once you have the money, you can doubt justice.
And that's why I've kept my eyes on one place, almost exclusively. One place with the formation of the new government, and that is in the office of Mr. Arawi. Because there are a lot of things that must be corrected there, put in place there, introduced in there, and updated.
Yeah.
For us to make any sense of where we're going to correct the situation Trinidad and Tobago finds itself.
It is, because campaign finance reform is just one small part, like I said, of the clock. You're dealing with legislation that deals with corruption, how you deal with corruption.
I want to get there after, but I beg to disagree just a little bit. I think it is a major part of it. Yeah. It is a major part of it because it interferes with the execution of justice. It interferes with the equal distribution of the assets of the nation. It interferes with how many people are moving forward when it starts to get better. How many people are falling below the crack because some people are just getting the cream off the top. Now, models. So we have articulated what we have looked at. What we have looked at, and like I said, it is one thing to talk it, it's another thing to start looking at some possible areas where you may find some solution. So when I started earlier and I spoke about the goalies and their respective goals wanting it played out there, I was not just casting blame at anybody, I was making a general point. You can't keep talking about where the ball is without letting it get close to the goalpost. Let's put it close to the goalpost, all right? Let's talk about one area is going to be to start capping how much corporations can put into a campaign. Whether in fact the nation is going to say we're going to have matching funds. Whether in fact the nation is going to say, listen guys, too much money is spent here. Every radio station in the country, every media outlet is going to give X amount of time for political parties, which allow many other people to get involved with it. Give me from the best of you what you've been looking at, Rishi, and I know it's a whole lot. Rishi Maharaj is my guest, CEO of Disclosure today. Give me what you have been looking at as possible areas you think we can put on the table for discussion.
Well, I mean, one, the whole idea of political parties and having legislation in the books to be able to actually deal properly with political parties. I mean, at the end of the day, political parties serve a legitimate purpose in terms of offering people who would deem themselves adequate to be able to represent the country and meet the needs of the country and citizens. So political parties do form a major process. And dealing with funding of political parties, I mean, there are several models that exist out there. Canada, for example, has one where they get funding from the state. In terms of, you look at your votes in the last elections, I think if you have a certain threshold, I think about 4% of the votes in the election, then based on the quantity of votes you get, there's a proportional amount of monies that are allocated to you, as well as there's also a reimbursement system where if you spend X amount of monies in the campaign, and the state will reimburse you a certain amount of funds back. So it's a way of funding political parties, not only during election time, but during the life cycle in between elections, to be able to have enough staff to do like research, present policy papers, to keep yourself out there in the public domain. So there's that public sector part of it. And then most other countries adopt a hybrid approach. We have a public-private, in that you allow the public sector, again, the state will subvent political parties, again, through the votes they got in elections and stuff like that. But then you also allow private parties to be able to contribute to political parties, but then you do so, you have a cap. So there's a cap exactly on sometimes how much private citizens can submit to a political party. There's a cap on how much corporations can submit to a party. Most countries actually have a ban on foreign entities contributing to a political party, because the whole question of foreign interference, we're not going to go into Donald Trump, and that's another partner by itself, but the whole question of foreign intervention in campaign, especially in developing countries, they have a ban on foreign countries being able to contribute to political parties. So that's the whole part of the funding.
All of that is important to understand, because that ban on foreign countries is primarily at the heart of what we're talking about, because that way they influence the policies of the country.
It does.
If they are in fact allowed to put money in. The same thing for corporations. If they are allowed to put major money inside, then they're going to have the access and we're going to have the problem.
Right, and then it also allows political parties to be more open and transparent in terms of accountability of their books. You have to have no proper accounting principles. You have to have annual reports. You have to present the numbers. And the election body is now responsible for monitoring political parties to ensure that you're within a certain guidelines. I mean, I know, for example, political parties in Trinidad have signed on to the code of ethics that was set up for the last election. I believe it was through His Worship, the Archbishop of Trinidad and Tobago. And a part of the code of ethics, I've actually disclosure today, actually signed up onto this code of ethics as being a supporting party of NGOs to support the political parties in this whole idea. Part of the code of ethics deals with political parties at the end of the election campaign, I think 6 months after, must submit their books to the committee in terms of what they spend election, stuff like that. I don't think that was done. Although they may have in principle said, I mean, in practice, it probably not.
Teeth is important here because there were aspects of that code that was broken very early with the exclusive TV appearance, for instance, broken very early. And what penalty was there?
Exactly.
Or is there? I am asking.
I don't think there was any penalty. I think there was, I mean, the chair of the Code of Ethics is Dr. Agnew, a good friend of mine at the university. But again, there was very limited wiggle room that they could have done in terms of enforcement. Because, I mean, they're just parties coming together to try to to enforce a particular code. So there's nothing enshrined in law. So if you have to do this, if you don't do this, you're going to get penalties and stuff like that. So it doesn't exist. But what some other countries have done, which I find interesting, especially in the Western Europeans, going away from the Westminster-like model countries, the UK, Canada, and England. For example, in Germany and most of Scandinavian countries, one way, first of all, they have no cap on spending. But how they treat with it is that you actually have a ban on advertising in the media, because the media takes up a big chunk of the monies that you spend for election campaigns. So I said, no, there is no cap on spending, for example, in Germany and in Norway. But what they have is that you can't actually advertise on the media.
Let's be clear, listeners, follow this now. The party in itself can use whatever means it wants to advertise, but when it comes to the media, there is a cap as to how far they can spend, how much they can spend.
First of all, the media is free. There's actually some countries actually have bans on political advertising during the election campaign. So you can't advertise on the television, you can't advertise on the radio and stuff like that. You put up your banners, those things you have in terms of advertising the media, and the media takes up a huge chunk of money. So what they're saying is, we're not going to cap you in terms of how much you can spend, but we're going to take away the main money earner that they're going to spend on. And it opens it up for a lot of smaller parties that don't have the financial power to be able to go in and fight in these elections, to come up and fight. And we actually saw it in Germany over the recent last elections, where although Angela Merkel won the election, we actually had this smaller right-wing party for the first time since, I think, World War II, actually getting inroads into the parliament and actually won, I think, 8 or 9 seats in the parliament.
Majorly, he helped make a decision as to which party, in fact, kind of party she's going to have.
Exactly. So, I mean, you saw where smaller parties, and that's what happens in a lot of these European countries, that you have a lot of these smaller parties will come up, and even Macron, the French president, he only formed when he broke away from the existing party, he only formed his own party about 2 or 3 years ago. And within that time, he was able to run and win the presidency. So you realize that there are a lot of things that corporations do, that countries do, to be able to manage and deal with this whole idea of campaign finance.
Let me stay with the area you mentioned there a moment ago. There is no cap on how much you can spend, just a cap on how much you can spend on media.
Where do you spend it?
Where you spend it. At the same time, is this is in Germany, am I correct?
Germany and Norway, for example.
Okay, stay with Germany there for a moment. Do they also have a cap on the contributions?
They do have caps on contributions.
All right, so they have caps on contributions from the individuals and the companies.
Right.
And then they have a cap of how much you can spend on media.
Yeah, more or less. So
invariably what they're saying is, let us encourage free speech from all others. What about the free speech area, where many have argued that spending money, particularly in the United States, free speech is in fact, political advertising is in fact free speech?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I know it was taken up at the European Court of Justice, the Human Rights Court in Europe, in the EU, this whole idea of banning the media. I know where the courts actually looked at it and saw that there's an impingement on free speech. They actually also looked at it from the other side of it, that political parties in the political process, and having that freedom not to inhibit certain smaller parties from getting into the fray was a bigger public interest in their minds, in terms of actually allowing different parties to come and have different voices to come in, instead of now actually having it stagnating into 1 or 2 or 3 major parties. You actually allow smaller parties to get involved and other people to get involved and get in the game. Whereas in the US, well, that's totally different, because money runs everything in the US, especially when it comes to the PAC and the super PACs, and allowing that. And the Supreme Court of Justice there has a very big play on, I think it was in 2010, where there was a case in which they actually blew up the whole idea of contribution and stuff like that, and that's where you saw all these big monies now being poured into.
It's going to be revisited again very soon in the Supreme Court, that is for sure. I want Rishi Maharaj is the voice you're hearing. He's the CEO of Disclosure Today. We're trying to just tie down a couple of areas, because this is a long discussion, but let me stay in the area of free speech, in the area of not inhibiting smaller parties, which means I'm going to stay in the model area you're talking about free media access. Explain to the best of your understanding how this operates in Germany, because that gives you an informed citizenry. An informed citizenry actually cuts down on the amount of money you need to spend, and an informed citizenry will demand that you discuss ideas and not piquant and bacchanal, and demonizing and pejorative advertising, that sort of thing. So explain to me how they work out, how they accommodate this free media access.
Well, how it works out in Germany, I think, for example, is there's a state media part of it in Germany. So they allow parties to be able to have access to free air and free space to be able to get your message across. But then in Germany, it's interesting actually. In Germany, they do a lot more of house-to-house campaigns. It's not. I mean, Germany is a big country. Germany is a huge country. It's a developed country. You would think that because of that, there'll be a lot of advertising on the airways to get people's message. But actually, in Germany's, it's interesting why I like the whole idea of how Germany approaches it. Is they get back to the old way of doing things. They actually have a lot more campaigners on the street, house to house, going to people, talking to people. You'll have people there at street corners with candidates at the street corners with their bells and their different campaigns and stuff like that. Very colorful, very very culturalistic. But I think they try to move away from flashing people on the media and to actually getting on the ground and talking to people on the ground and adopting that kind of groundwork campaigning, as opposed to having everything flashy in the media and stuff like that, and slogans that every time you put on the radio during election campaign, every 2-3 minutes, it's a paid advertisement by X and X or X and Y. So they try to bring it back down to dealing with the people, dealing with issues in your different communities in different areas.
Norway has the same basic system?
Norway also has a way in that, I think in Norway it's actually political advertising is actually banned in Norway. Yes, you can't advertise on the airwaves in Norway and stuff like that.
Let's say Trinidad and Tobago here for a minute. I want to bring that free speech concept, that free media access concept to Trinidad and Tobago. How doable you think that would be here?
That needs to have a collaborative approach, I think, with the EBC, the government, the state, as well as with the Publishers and Broadcasters Association. And also, I think then you also probably going to have to bring in TAT also with regards to that. It's interesting that I know most broadcasters in their licenses that they have with TAT, I think back when I worked in the Ministry of Information, TAT was TAT wasn't under our ministry, but we dealt with the whole idea of the free time and trying to enforce that whole level of free time. And the publishers and broadcasters say, well, yeah, we are giving you free time. You just can't tell us exactly when to put the free time.
Well, because what has been argued many times is folks put it at midnight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
where you have prime time or stuff like that. And say,
but you can give a window of prime time. I mean, you can legislate. You can have in your license condition. It is that this should be done between 6 in the morning and 6 in the night.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be a collaboration between the state, TAT, and the Media and Broadcasters Association, because you have to understand, yes, the media has a major role to play in disseminating information on elections, and it shouldn't only be for profiteering. I mean, elections are a serious business. You're talking about electing people to run your country and to run the affairs of a $45 billion economy for 5 years. So you should be an avenue to allow different views, different voices, and not only who can pay to play, but those who are out there who can't afford but may have valuable opportunities or policies that they want to put on the table. So I think it needs to be a collaborative effort.
And I ask you this simply because, and I'm chuckling because in asking you this is because a lot of the major contributors, the large contributors in a country, example, Trinidad and Tobago maybe, they are the ones who own media.
Yeah, exactly.
so on the one hand, they will find it against their interests to have free access. I don't think there would be many political parties that may raise an objection to the whole idea of open access. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be more of a corporation business type pushback. This is the whole idea to free access. But I mean, and now there are apart from the media, also, I think this is a topic that this part has never been talked about anywhere, and this is actually being done in India. If I'm memory serves me correctly. Normally, many people are accused that when the election time is coming along, the party that's in power still has a advantage because they have the power of the state and the resources of the state in terms of monies and contracts being awarded to be able to push their own projects and stuff like that quickly during election campaign and say like they're doing work and stuff like that. And actually what they've done in India is that during election times in India, the government is I don't exactly remember the figures, exactly the percentage, but there is a restriction on the amount of contracts or monies that can be spent by the government during the election period in time to be able to state that you don't have an unequal advantage. So in terms of awarding a $500 million contract or a $300 million contract just 5 days before an election to somebody else. I think there are certain restrictions also on the role that political party, the government can do in terms of awarding contracts leading up to an election campaign. And then there's also some countries have also taken the step of actually limiting the time frame by which you have an election campaigns. Instead of having it for over a 8-week or 6-week period, you narrow it down to a shorter time frame of within 3 weeks you have an election. So less time again, less money to spend, stuff like that. So there are different models that many countries have used to be.
And that is not a bad model. I'm not too sure about the time frame, but I think that's not a bad idea at all to shorten the election period, man, the campaigning period, because I mean it really gets obscene.
You get frustrated.
It absorbs a lot of money, and you have what is called a tune-out factor, because the citizenry tune out,
exactly.
And in order to get their attention, you've got to get more scandalous.
Exactly.
You've got to get more ridiculous.
A lot more.
You amp it up a lot more. Restriction of a dollar spent in a year of campaigning is something that surely is going to work here. What other aspects would you say of the models that you're looking at that would assist Trinidad and Tobago in going this way? And equally important, or maybe before you answer that, I should ask you this. Are you aware of anything that's been put on the table that's being discussed now in the area of campaign reform?
Well,
and if it includes any of those that we mentioned.
Okay, well, I mean, before the last election, there was a joint select committee of parliament that actually looked at the whole idea of campaign finance reform, and there was a report that was put out by the committee. And I think the part of that report, there would have been a position paper put forward by the Elections and Boundaries Commission. It's actually available on the Parliament website. And probably after this program, I have a copy of the document on my system. I could probably post up on Facebook so people can have an access to that document. In that document, you'll see a position paper put forward by the EBC that I think provides valuable insight and ideas as to how they think we can approach this. So that's one aspect. Following the election, however, there was in 2016 a 2-day consultation held by the Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs at the Hyatt. And we know disclosure today attended it, and which they brought in several distinguished speakers from different countries, the UK, some from Latin America. The UNDP also had helped them bring on speakers in terms of different ideas. You can deal with different models, different approaches to deal with the whole idea, campaign finance reform, capping how much people can spend, capping how much MPs can spend, capping on the contributions of corporations, and possibly a state sector hybrid model also. Following that, the only time I heard campaign finance reform come up again was when the Honorable Prime Minister made his gave us his report of the meeting he had with the Honorable Leader of the Opposition. I think it was in August or July, or I think it was July of this year, in which they made a commitment to deal with the whole idea of campaign finance reform. But again, that's just all those things are just talking. We haven't seen anything material come out on the table. So all I know for sure is that the AG office is looking and working on the different things that they have had before in the past to possibly put out some kind of position paper, I guess, or something in Parliament soon. But we haven't heard anything else since then.
One of the questions and one of the things folks like to say is careful about bringing ideas from outside into Trinidad and Tobago because it may not work here. Do you see any downside in some of the areas of campaign finance reform that has been introduced in other Westminster-like governed countries? Have you seen? Are you seeing any downside from the Germany, from the Norway example, the UK example even?
Well, I've never been a supporter of a one-hat-fits-all ideology. I think it's difficult even in small countries like ours to adopt something from other jurisdictions or cultures and bring it into your country. I think it's good to look at the whole idea of models that have existed in any normal trifecta of countries. Normally look at the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and even Canada. In terms of those 4 countries, the normal countries we look at, even India, to a lesser extent in terms of what they've done, because it's a similar Westminster-like system. But I think also in looking at what other European countries have done, even other Latin American countries, to try to deal with the whole idea of campaign finance, not like campaign finance reform, but the whole idea of also electoral reform in terms of the way you conduct your elections, of which campaign is one part of it, and then the whole idea of political parties and sustaining political parties throughout the elections, when the election cycle is done from one election cycle to another election cycle. I think there are good ideas that we can look at and discuss and bring on the table to see exactly what are some of the things we need that could fit into our culture. What are some of the things we think that could fit into our legislative framework of what we can do. And I think it's something like this should not be driven by politicians. It should not be driven by political parties. It shouldn't even be driven by the lobbyists or those who finance. It needs to be a broad range of ideas coming from the government, coming from political parties, coming from financiers, but also coming from civil society and coming from the media and coming from other people out there.
Which is precisely why we're having the discussion, because unless the citizenry understands what's involved in this, we will keep having people staying in their position, staying in their lane, their comfort lane, and there will be no additional pressure for this, except when you find out who spent money last time, then somebody say he got this. But you just look at the way the contracts are moved about. You just looked about who has access to what.
Right.
And you realize that it is one thing to make an argument for the 1%ers who you say are running things, but unless you can get into campaign finance reform, that is a stupid argument, because if you pay your money, you're going to get some return on it. That stands to reason. I do want to ask you this. Oh, by the way, I like to go with which comes first, the chicken or the egg. I still think I'm going to stay with the egg. In the area that you have to straighten out the first part of financing before you get into the electoral reform. It makes no sense getting a nice shoe over here and the leather is faulty.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's just a case of moving it in the right place. Which brings me into transparency. If I ask you, as the CEO, which he is, listeners, by the way, my guest is the CEO of Disclosure Today. He's Rishi Maharaj. If I ask you to tell me now, who were the major contributors of the last election? And your organization is dedicated to finding out this sort of thing. Can you answer me?
Yeah.
Neither party.
And that's the thing. We have, there's the official and there's the unofficial. Unofficially, anybody can tell you, who campaign finance, who financed this one, who financed the other one. But when it comes now to the legal part of it and the awarding of contract and saying, this person was a financier. Okay, well.
Stop for a moment.
Where's the evidence?
Is the IRS, the Border Inland Revenue, Inland Revenue, whatever,
right.
Our tax folks, are they able to see from, corporations must declare what they put out? Well, they should. Are they able to do any follow through on that? In other words, if you're looking to get your checks and balances once you come to an understanding that we need to have disclosure, should the BIR, or whichever authorities put in place, be working as far as ensuring that the public information is accurate because of what they get coming back here?
Well, you're talking about a 21st century style election kind of campaign and stuff like that on 1950s legislation. So obviously the legislative teeth or the ability of our tax agencies to be able to actually, they can't even look at how much taxes people pay and people who pay or who don't pay tax and slip through the hole. So I think there is no mechanism. But you touched on a very important point there, in that there also needs to be a correlation between your tax returns, contributions, and financing political parties. Some countries, for example, in the UK, if you look at the UK Electoral Commission's website, they actually have on the website, in terms of political parties, have to show who their contributors were.
Yes.
In terms of dollar values and stuff like that. So you have an idea in terms of individuals as well as corporations who contribute to political parties. And then in some countries also, they have tax breaks. Because, funding political parties, like I said, political parties are not a bad thing.
Right.
They form a very important part of any political countries. And the sustainability and viability of political parties depend on having to make monies and having monies allocated to them to be able to sustain themselves. So obviously, funding or sending money to political parties is a useful thing. And it's a good thing. And in some countries, they actually have tax incentives to be able to support political parties, and then you get tax write-offs and stuff. But then all that comes in form of having a proper taxation system to be able to monitor and see exactly what contributions you've made to be able to get your write-offs and stuff like that.
Because a lot of folks will use, of course, loopholes is all part of this. Guy's gonna have his company send up, let's say, $100,000, and then he is going to put $80,000 himself, have his brother, his sister, his mother, and his aunt as individuals all put together $80,000 before before you know it, they have way eclipsed what the corporation and or what the limits are. So you can look at that and realize, as we say in Trini, walla walla, bing bang in there,
Right.
something is going on, right? And that is why it is so important, because this same individual, a family of 5, and they all put $80,000 inside of them. The same individual is the one who's going to have access later on, may probably get all the contracts, may get all the breaks, and then we have this select group moving up, and the rest of the
exactly.
nation falling further.
Right? And also, for me, campaign finance reform is also important for the members of political parties. Because I mean, if you're a member of political parties and you pay your membership fees assiduously to political parties every year, because I mean, the philosophy, the ethos, all the political parties, something like that, you feel a fervor for and you want to support the political parties, then but during a election campaign, a corporation comes in and gives $5 or $6 million to fund an election campaign. They're now going to have unequal access to the leadership of the party, and it disingenuizes the members. So for me personally, I think it also plays an important part in terms of members and members having access to the echelons of their parties and not being left out. Well, okay, you're just every 5 years we go and pull you out and you come and you vote for stuff like that. It has to be more than that. And I think also for members of any political party, something like this is also important for them. It means that they also can have more of a say in the running of their political party and not a select elite people in terms of who has the money to be able to go up the echelons and stuff like that.
Not telling you anything you don't know when I say Rishi Maharaj, no politician or no party is going to want to do what you folks have been talking about. So here is my question. What is a citizen? What is the citizenry to do? How can we force this ball closer to the goalpost? How can we bring this brunch to the table? How can we have something to discuss and push people to do it? Powers extracts nothing. It's not.
Well, I think it needs to be a collaborative effort of civil society. I mean, campaign finance reform is something I've been working on for the last 2 years. And interestingly enough, during the beginning of the 2015 election campaign, Disclosure Today, I think, was the only NGO that came out at that time. And we actually wrote to all the political parties who were contesting the elections at that time to get them, because as far as we're concerned, there was nothing in law that precluded you from saying who your financiers were. There was nothing in law that stopped you from saying who is financing your party. So we actually wrote to all political parties and got them and asked them, will you please disclose who is financing you? Will you please, I think it was 6 or 8 pledges that we asked them to adhere to in terms of the code of ethics of campaigning, in terms of submitting your report to the EBC 14 days after the election, stuff like that. It is prescribed by law. And we actually pushed the whole idea of campaigning, who is funding you. The public has a right to know, as far as we were concerned during that time, as to who is funding you. Obviously, the smaller parties were willing to commit, but obviously the bigger parties were not. And what we actually did was we actually got pointed questions to the Prime Minister at the time, Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bisasa, and to the then leader of the opposition, the Honorable Keith Rowley, and asked them publicly, who is financing you? Will you disclose who are your campaign financiers? And both of them said, we'll disclose if the other man disclosed. But what you actually saw come out of that 2015 election, I think, which was admirable, is you actually got the media to start to ask questions a lot more as to who's financing you. I think we actually had a good example, I think, was with MP Rodney Charles and Vasampa, where they had some kind of campaign going on in certain parts and obviously obscuring the leader of the opposition at the time. And the media is literally asking them, well, who is funding you for this? Is this funding you by the UNC? Who is giving the money? I think eventually they had to backtrack on that campaign.
Yeah, I'm still going to come to the point you made. You know, if on the one hand, your party is saying, you go first, no, you go first. Exactly. And I have a couple of lieutenants telling me this one is doing this, and no, there's a disconnect here.
Exactly.
It's got to be a commitment from the party, not an individual member doing what is a good PR business.
Right. So I think we actually have to force the ball.
Yes.
I mean, we as civil society, as the media, as known people, have to force the ball to government to be able to move forward and get this on public discussion. I think we should not wait until the year 2018 to 2019. All of a sudden, the whole idea of campaign finance reform
and then it comes up for lip service again.
Exactly, and then they're going to rush. So I think we need something that I've been working on for the last 6-7 months, the whole idea of trying to come up with a position paper on campaign finance reform. I hope to have it completed hopefully by early January or February of next year, to put out there in the public domain to say this as disclosure today. This is the whole idea of what we think needs to be looked at. I'm not going to be offering solution. I don't think we need to offer solution at this time, but to put out there in the public domain like we're doing today.
That's right.
These are some of the things that exist out in other countries that I think we need to look at, and we need to push. And we need to push the political party and push the process to move forward and take this thing very seriously.
It's most important. It is most important that we do that. Hence the reason organizations like yours, Disclosure Today, Transparency International, and other bodies who are trying to do this, I have to salute you guys, because at the end of the day, an informed citizenry is going to be in a position to make demands. We know that power concedes absolutely nothing. You have to grab it from them, and that is what we're hoping conversations like this will do. Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic that because I'm intrigued by this possibility. I look at the way the manipulation is done here. Are you optimistic that media access is something that will be looked at? You know, on the one hand, you have folks who say, well, you know, a lot of our budget comes from election. On the other hand, while your budget is coming from election, your institution is falling down. Your representation is becoming more and more partial. So at some point, somebody's got to bite the bullet and say, maybe we should just look at giving John Tom access, the same access that we give to Gene or whoever. So how optimistic are you that there will be an embrace coming from media of this idea of equal access?
I don't think we're going to have a full rampant Germany or Norway model where you're going to have a ban on political advertising. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think I'm optimistic, actually, greatly, especially given the last election in 2015. I think there is going to be more push by organizations outside here, like Disclosure and like other individuals, for media to be able to say, listen, we need to have access, free access, time, space allocated to all political parties in the process to put forward their positions. And also, I think also we need to have a serious push towards proper debates, legislatively implemented.
Legislatively implemented. And that is important.
I think it has to be legislatively implemented.
Yes.
That by the EBC, which is our independent arm for election process in the country, to be able to have these debates live out there, and not to have people backing out, well, because this date not good with me, or I can't go with this date and stuff. I think that nonsense has to stop. In this day and age, with the open access to information people have access to, I think that nonsense now has to stop. So I think the media is going to come to the ball, and I hope that they will allocate more time, more free time, prime time, in the afternoon period, drive time period, and night time, to allow different political parties or people out there who want to put themselves up for political representation to have their voice, their policies out there.
Legislative debates, legislative penalties for not disclosing, cooperation between your BIR or your Board of Revenue, whoever, between your tax authority, thank you, working to ensure that what is represented is accurate, and serious penalties for violation.
Yeah, and having political parties be more accountable and open up your books.
Yep, I hear you.
In terms of exactly who funds you, in terms of how you allocate the money, how you spend the money. Again, this I think is important for the members of political parties and members of political parties to understand that it's not every 5 years they need to come out and support and wear their particular color jerseys or whatever like that.
And if you raise $1 million and you spent $750,000 in the campaign, where's the other $250,000?
Exactly.
just an interesting question. Rishi Maharaj, Disclosure Today, tell our listeners how they can get involved, come up, because there's a part of something that's happening up at Disclosure Today that I was intrigued from when they introduced it. I continue to be intrigued, and I am a little disquieted or saddened that I don't see a lot more people, at least the result of a lot more people, using that power that you give to them, which is that you will act as their agent for freedom of information on things happening here. Speak to that.
Disclosure Today actually assists a lot of people out there who want advice and guidance on making freedom of information requests to public authorities. And then one of the major things we do is that there are people who may not want to put their names on there for FOI requests, actually Disclosure Today will work with you, and we will put the request in our name to protect your interest and your name out there to public authorities to try to get the information from you. And then we also have a nice, strong team of lawyers backing us, both here in Trinidad and Tobago and in the UK, to be able to go to court if we have to get the information for you. And then, interestingly enough, in November, I think November 19th to 24th of this year, Disclosure Today has been invited to attend the OGP, which is the Open Government Partnership Regional Americas Conference, being held in Argentina, and actually going to be presenting a paper on freedom of information and the impact it has on government transparency at that conference. So I'm going to be looking at the whole idea of freedom of information, because we've had the legislation passed now for the last 15 years in this country, but what impact has it really had on transparency and openness in government? Are they more transparent? I mean, that's a point that many people
Saga
say.
continues.
They've probably gone more back to closed door. So.
Yeah, getting more cute with their attitudes to and responding,
Exactly.
because that is something that really I find a disrespect in which folks respond to one, spending our money, having spent our money, and or what happened to the contributions people make. It's just untenable. So, okay, it's 8 minutes after 11. Rishi, thank you so much.
No problem.
You come around and have yourself a wonderful Sunday, okay?
You too.
Thank you so much. Rishi Maharaj, the CEO of Disclosure Today, my guest inside Brunch.